I feel like when kids are growing up, their parents always teach them don't tell a lie, but it's never really fully explained why lying is actually a sin and not just something that you can get away with. So I looked it up in the Catechism. I recently had a dream, and I've been reading the articles about the judicial system, how people like plead not guilty, so they get a lesser charge, even if all the evidence is against them and it's very clear that they are guilty. When they submit that not guilty plea, they are potentially committing a mortal sin. So, St. Augustine actually defines a lie as speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. So, a lie is actually a sin because it is an offense against truth. When I asked my husband why he thought lying was a sin, he was saying how it creates inauthenticity and that you're not being your true self, which are both very accurate things, like it is inauthentic, but the fact that it's an offense against truth. So we as human beings are given free will. We can choose to do whatever we want, not without consequences, of course, but we can choose what to do. And so we have, to a certain degree, a right to the truth so that we can make a properly informed decision. Now, somebody who has been told a lie and believes the lie can actually still tell a lie even if they are inadvertently telling the truth. So say there are 3 siblings. We'll say Clark, Allie, and Bobby. We'll use my siblings' names. So Clark breaks a lamp and he tells me that Bobby did it. And then I think that Bobby did it, but I go to my mom and I tell my mom that Clark did it. I'm actually telling the truth, but I'm telling a lie because my intent was to deceive my mom to get Clark in trouble and get Bobby off the hook, even though Clark was in fact the guilty party. So with that intention to deceive, I would still be telling a lie even though I'm inadvertently telling the truth, because the whole thing boils down to intention. That is the culmination of what lying is. So, they talk about lying by omission, lying by leaving something out. When you're talking with somebody, say, I'm like sitting at the dinner table and I know that Bobby has broken this vase, which was a lie in the first place, right? But I'm sitting there and I know that he is, and it's like weighing heavy on my heart, and I don't tell my parents. That would be lying by omission, If they were to directly ask me and I give them a false answer, that's directly lying. But if I was sitting there and I wasn't even thinking about it and it just happened to never get brought up, like the intention wasn't necessarily to hide it. It's just that it was never brought up. So therefore, that would not constitute a lie by omission. There has to be a willing intent to leave out information. In the judicial system, right, it's obstruction of justice. And so when we look at the Old Testament, look at the 10 Commandments, the 9th commandment, do not lie, it's actually do not bear false witness. So it deals more with the court, because in Judaic law, the courts held up everything. And if somebody presented a false witness, the consequences are deadly. So it becomes a mortal sin when a grave matter would be to befall the person that it would affect. So say somebody has murdered, Susie killed Sally, and Susie goes and says that she didn't do it, and so then Hunter gets blamed for the death of Susie. And so Sally is off the hook, but her lie of saying that she wasn't guilty ended up putting somebody else in prison, which ends up being a mortal sin. So when a grave matter is at hand, that is when it really becomes a mortal sin. So a bunch of different aspects. We have the respect for reputation. So slander is within lying, or calumny is also in there, where it's remarks contrary to the truth, where it harms the reputation. Rash judgment. If you assume a truth without doing proper research, you have the moral fault. And detraction, which is without an objective, valid reason, you disclose another's faults and failings to a person who didn't know them. So I was thinking about this with a Google review that I had to post. We had hired somebody to do a job and they did it really poorly and they wouldn't give a reimbursement. And I like went off on this person in a Google review, 1 star. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, was that unfair or is it a just reason? And so we ended up having to take them to small claims court, and we won, but they still haven't reimbursed us our money. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe it was a rash judgment the first time, but now if I were to put a post, it would actually be more justifiable that I would share this experience because they did not follow through with what was given to them. Like, he is avoiding his responsibility to reimburse us the fees for doing a poor job. But so there's a lot of intention that comes into whether or not lying is actually like a mortal or a venial sin, or what would actually constitute a lie. So anything that I wrote in the review initially was nothing false. Like, everything I wrote was true. I didn't make stuff up just to make him look bad. But it was probably a rash judgment. I mean, it was like 2 nights later when I was really frustrated about the situation. I didn't really talk to him about much other, like, he had to come back once. Anyway, but like, it was probably a rash judgment to proclaim to anyone on Google that this particular company had done bad. No, I am not telling you the company. See? So I'm doing better. But so in the Catechism, it talks about in 2484, the gravity of a lie is measured against the nature of the truth it deforms, the circumstances, the intention of the one who lies, and the harm suffered by its victims. And so, like I said, it does grave injury to the virtues of justice and charity is when it becomes a mortal sin. So lying is to be condemned. By its very nature, it's to be condemned. It says the deliberate intention of leading a neighbor into error by saying things contrary to the truth constitutes a failure in justice and charity. So obviously we look at like President Trump. A lot of people say that he lies all the time. And every time that he stretches the truth or says something rash or does anything like that, he's actually committing a mortal sin, because it is a grave consequence if he is misleading the general public to believe a particular thing with the level of office that he holds. Now, if he was just some Joe Schmo spouting his mouth off on his little Facebook page with 100 friends or whatever, like, the gravity of that is not as substantial. But with President Trump, he is, taking truth and distorting it, or completely just going off base. And I'm just bringing him up specifically because it's been an issue that a lot of people have had with him, saying he just lies all the time. And it is something for us as Catholics to take seriously, to say, is he being misleading? Is he making rash statements? Is he, creating falsehoods? And is he intentionally deceiving people? Like, is it just a power grab? Is it, that he authentically needs X, Y, or Z? We have to be prudent in who we listen to and how we listen to it. And the mainstream media as a whole, like, I will include them in all of this, because they too tend to stretch the truth and lie and mislead the general public. And there is a moral responsibility that ends up playing into news stations for presenting truth. I could create a video with the intention of trying to get a lot of views. I could get on here and spout off some stuff and really make some statements that would gain some traction, and that could be my intent. Or I can just sit here and talk calmly and hopefully rationally about a topic and probably only reach, a couple hundred. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to expand truth or act in a manner that's contrary to my nature, just to gain views or anything like that, or to gain support, as Trump unfortunately has, or that the mainstream media unfortunately does. There's a lot that just plays into that. So the interesting thing about lying, the two primary sections that are in the Catechism are the offenses against truth and then respect for the truth. So the right to the communication of the truth, the states it's not unconditional in paragraph 2488. So we have to use prudence when we are sharing truth. So back to my Google review, I needed to use a little more prudence to say, okay, what aspects that I was unhappy with this job, what aspects truly needed to be in that review? You know, there were some minor details that I vented about in the review, and ultimately, I didn't need to include some of that. I just needed to give the general gist of like, be careful of this person. If you are dissatisfied, they will not, you know, be reasonable or whatever. I don't even know if I'd use that word. I'd have to think about how I have to review my review. Like, I haven't. This whole thing has kind of convicted me on that, although, you know, bringing up small claims, I think, is a responsible and not rash, especially because now I have to file a subpoena for bank records. Like, he is not paying us back. It is a whole thing. And so there is a moral culpability on his part as well that he is not following through with what has been given to him. And it was not unjust. It was, I think that the judge was more than fair. He actually split it like 50-50, so we both won in a sense. But anyway, so the right to the truth is not necessarily unconditional. We have to use prudence about whether it's, as it says, whether or not it's appropriate to reveal the truth, either to somebody who asks for it and requests the information, or that you're just talking about it. So it says no one is bound to reveal the truth to someone who does not have the right to know it. So that would basically be, you know, say somebody was asking, like, if I approached one of my friends and like asked an intimate question, you know, about like their intimacy, I don't have a right to know anything about the truths of what goes on between the two of them. They can choose to say, I'd rather not share that. And that's not a lie. It's not a lie by omission. It's simply stating you don't have a right to know this. It's none of your business. And there you go. So the intention within all of it, is now you could try to say, well, Clark, you know, back to the vase example, Clark broke the vase, and so my parents would have a right to the truth. I don't necessarily have a right to the truth of who broke it because it's not my vase. It essentially has nothing to do with me. And so the right to truth for me, the lie that Clark would tell to me saying that Bobby broke it would not carry the same weight as it would if he lied directly to our parents. A lot of different exceptions. The basic moral of the story is, you know, be honest and forthright in the proper situations. I was just recently chatting with somebody, actually. I was thinking about that whole like right to truth. I was chatting with somebody who is not Catholic, who was talking about like wanting to get their tubes tied. And there was like a part of me that's like, oh, well, the Catholic Church teaches this and they teach that and this is why, and it just makes so much sense if you really think about it. But they weren't asking. We were just developing a new relationship. It's not something, you know, truth is not something to be shoved down somebody's throat. And I listened and like did my best to just communicate and meet them where they were. And that doesn't mean that I was withholding truth from them or not giving them the right to the truth. It just means that that they were not at that place to know yet. So that's where it talks about it requires us in concrete situations to judge whether or not it is appropriate to reveal the truth to someone who asks for it. So we just have to like be very careful of our situations, be very careful of what we're listening to, but ultimately we only, like, our onus is on ourselves. We have to check ourselves at the door, so to speak, and make sure that we are being honest in our lives. And the easiest way to be honest is to do the best we can. Like, you know, if the police pulls you over and you were going 40 and a 30, you don't say, oh, my speedometer is broken. You say, yeah, I was going 40, I was in a hurry, and whatever. You know, you want to be honest. You don't, you know, and if you're, yeah. So just, I mean, the gravity of everything plays differently. Like, even with speeding, right? Like, ultimately, if you're like, oh, I can get away with this and speed, go 40 miles an hour in a residential area, that can ultimately have a grave implication if you accidentally hit a child that's playing and runs out into the street. So we have to make good decisions, and I'm probably going on about this a little bit long, but the ultimate aspect that I wanted to cover today was that the crux of the reason the ninth commandment, I guess in the Catholic Church it's the eighth commandment. I don't know how that gets kind of like skewed. I always grew up with it being the ninth commandment. But yeah, but just with misrepresenting the truth, we have to remember that it's an offense against truth. And the Catholic Church is ultimately the epitome of truth, right? That is what we look for. That is why we are Catholic, because we believe that it holds truth and life, and no truth can be found outside of it. And so when we talk about lying being an offense against truth, it's an offense against God himself, because he is truth and wholeness and goodness. And we need to live in the truth and be, as the Old Testament attests, God is the source of all truth. And, he is the truth and the way, the truth, and the life, right? No one comes to the Father but through me. And so we definitely have to be, sincere and be forward and truthful in all of our interactions and all of our doings. And simply, as it says in 2470, the disciple of Christ consents to live in the truth, that is the simplicity of a life in conformity with the Lord's example, abiding in his truth. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not live according to the truth. So like I said, if we just make our decisions from the get-go that we are going to follow, the commandments, going to love our neighbor, love God first and foremost, love our neighbor as ourselves, we're ultimately going to be walking in that truth and that inherent wisdom to know when and where sharing that truth is imperative, and to be responsible in that. We will naturally know, because the Holy Spirit will guide, the Holy Spirit will speak, and that's what we need to be looking for and working toward. So those are my thoughts for today. I'm sure that there are probably 20 directions that this conversation could go. So if there was something in particular that I stated that stood out to you that you have further questions about, or maybe you disagreed with something that I said, leave it in the comments below or send me a message, whatever works. I don't care. But I just, it was a good reflection for me. I'm currently watching a TV show, Man with a Plan. I guess it's on CBS. It has Joey from Friends in it. And it has some language, but it's okay. But the first season was, every single episode was, he would lie about something and then his wife would find out about it. And then he would lie about something and then his wife would find out about it. And it's this awkward, funny exchange when she does. But ultimately, it was kind of okay, this is starting to get old. And now season 2, they changed the layout of every episode. But it was interesting just to watch. It's I don't lie in my marriage, and Alec doesn't lie. He doesn't have to tell me that he's working late and then actually goes to the bar with his friends or something like that. I dated somebody who lied, and it drove me crazy. And so we just need to be prudent in our decisions and find that space to be honest and forthcoming. And God will bless it, and he'll guide us all. So I pray that God is able to grant you the resources that you need to draw closer to him and to those around you. And I pray that you are able to make it a great day. I'll talk to you soon.